Asterisk, asterisk, Part 1. Red Dust of Dust Haven. Asterisk, asterisk. The dawn came to Dust Haven like a reluctant visitor, dragging its feet through layers of dust that had settled overnight on every surface that dared to face the sky. Eli Mercer hefted another sack of hay onto his broad shoulders, the weight familiar as breathing, the rough burlap scraping against calluses earned through years of honest labor. At 29, he moved with the economy of a man who'd learned that wasted motion meant wasted energy. And in this drought-stricken corner of Wyoming territory, energy was as precious as water. "Mornin', Eli." Young Jonah Bell's voice cracked across the morning stillness. Somewhere between boy and man at 17, the kid bounced on worn boot heels, eager as a pup despite the early hour. "Want me to start on the east fence line?" Eli set down the hay, wiping sweat that was already beading despite the cool morning air. "Check the posts near the creek bed first. Wind last night might have loosened them." He paused, noticing Jonah's gaze drift to the leather strap across his saddle, a broken buckle that Eli never bothered to fix, though any competent leather worker could have done it in minutes. The boy had the sense not to ask, but Eli saw the question in his eyes nonetheless. "Some things," Eli said quietly, adjusting the damaged buckle with practiced fingers. "Serve better broken," reminds a man what needs remembering. The sound of hooves on packed earth announced company before the riders came into view. Sheriff Amos Holder sat his mount like a man 20 years younger, though the morning light caught the gray threading through his beard and the slight tremor in his hands as he gripped the reins. Beside him, his daughter Ruth commanded her horse with an ease that spoke of a lifetime in the saddle. At 24, she wore her authority like that navy bandana around her neck, practical, unpretentious, but unmistakably hers. "Eli," the sheriff nodded, then erupted into a coughing fit that bent him forward in his saddle. Ruth's hand moved toward her father, then stopped, respecting his pride even as worry flickered across her features. "Sheriff, Miss Ruth." Eli touched his hat brim, noting how Ruth's jaw tightened at the "miss." She'd been keeping the peace alongside her father for 5 years now, but the town still couldn't quite wrap their minds around a woman wearing a deputy's responsibilities, even without the badge. "We're heading into town," Ruth said, her voice carrying that particular blend of steel and silk that marked the daughters of the frontier, soft enough to soothe a frightened child, firm enough to stare down a drunk cowhand. "Heard there might be trouble at the Buckhorn." "When ain't there trouble at the Buckhorn?" Eli asked, allowing himself a small smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Ruth's lips quirked in response. "Fair point, but Maylin sent word that Crow's men have been asking questions about water rights again." The name Crow fell between them like a stone in still water, ripples of implication spreading outward. Bartholomew Crow owned half the county and had his sights set on the other half. The drought had given him the leverage he needed when water became scarce. Those who controlled it controlled everything. The sheriff straightened in his saddle, fighting back another cough. "Just questions, far as we know. Man's got a right to ask questions." "And folks got a right to keep what's theirs," Ruth countered, her gaze finding Eli's for a moment that stretched longer than propriety might dictate. There was something in that look, not invitation exactly, but acknowledgement. Two people recognizing a kindred stubbornness in the face of an unjust world. They rode on, dust swirling in their wake, and Eli returned to his work. But his movements were mechanical now, his mind turning over that look like a man might worry at a sore tooth. Town was already stirring when the Holders arrived. Dust Haven wore its aspirations like an ill-fitting suit, wooden sidewalks that pretended it's civilization, false-fronted buildings reaching toward respectability, and the distant whistle of the railroad that promised prosperity while delivering mostly trouble. The smithy's hammer rang out its morning greeting, smoke already rising from the forge where Samuel Hayes bent iron to his will. Across the street, May Lynn Tran's seamstress shop displayed a dress in the window that managed to look elegant despite the film of dust that coated everything in town. The Buckhorn Saloon squatted on the corner like a toad made of weathered wood and broken promises. Even at this early hour, voices drifted through the bat-wing doors, not the raucous laughter of evening, but the low, dangerous murmur of men discussing business better left in shadows. Ruth dismounted with fluid grace, her split skirts practical rather than scandalous, though Mrs. Henderson still clutched her pearls whenever she saw them. "I'll check inside," she told her father. "Ruth," Amos began, but she was already pushing through the doors. The conversation inside stopped like a knife cut through rope. Ruth let her eyes adjust to the dimness, cataloging faces and exits with the automatic precision her father had taught her. 3 of Crow's men hunched over a corner table Sutter Lane, whose scarred hands told stories of violence. Caleb Pike, young and mean as a rattlesnake, and a third man she didn't recognize, wearing the kind of clothes that said he wasn't from around here. "Morning, gentlemen," she said, pleased when her voice came out steady and calm. "Awful early to be conducting business." Sutter Lane smiled, the expression pulling at the scar that bisected his left cheek. "No law against early rising. Miss Holder, your daddy send you in here to check on us?" "Nobody sends me anywhere. Mr. Lane." She moved further into the room, noting how the bartender's hand drifted below the bar, whether reaching for the scattergun or a glass to polish. She couldn't tell. "Just making sure everyone's planning on having a peaceful day." "Peaceful as Sunday hymns," Pike drawled, though his hand rested a little too casual-like near his holster. "We're just discussing water. Precious commodity these days." "That it is," Ruth agreed. "Which is why folks get mighty protective of what little they have." The stranger spoke for the first time, his voice carrying the clipped tones of Eastern education. "Perhaps that's the problem, Miss Holder. This antiquated notion that individuals can own what nature provides freely. Mr. Crow simply wishes to ensure equitable distribution of resources." Ruth let out a laugh that had more edge than humor. "Equitable. That's a fancy word for taking what ain't yours." The tension in the room cranked up another notch, but before anyone could respond, the door swung open again. Amos Holder filled the doorway, his presence still commanding despite the stoop that hadn't been there last winter. "Gentlemen," he nodded, then looked to his daughter. "Ruth, Mrs. Martinez needs that report about her stolen chickens." It was an out, gracefully offered, and Ruth recognized it as such. But she also saw the slight wheeze in her father's breathing, the way he gripped the door frame for support he'd never admit to needing. "Of course," she said, but made sure to meet each man's eyes before she turned. "You all have a pleasant day now." Outside, Amos leaned against a post, pulling in air like a man surfacing from deep water. "One of these days," he managed between breaths, "that mouth of yours is going to write a check your gun can't cash." "Learn from the best," Ruth replied softly, watching the color slowly return to his face. "What do you think they're planning?" "Nothing good." He straightened, pride overcoming pain. "But knowing and proving are 2 different animals." They made their rounds, checking in at the general store where old Mr. Finch complained about the credit Crow's men were running up, stopping by Doc Estelle Ward's office where she tended to a farmhand who'd collapsed from heat exhaustion, pausing at the church where Deacon Harlan's nervous greeting suggested he knew more than he was saying. It was near noon when the real trouble started. A commotion near the old limestone well north of town, the North Well. Folks called it Drew a Crowd. Maggie O'Brien, widowed last winter when fever took her husband, stood with her 2 young boys clutching her skirts while her small herd of cattle milled about, lowing their thirst. Blocking access to the well were 5 of Crow's men, Pike and Lane among them, rifles held casual-like across their saddle horns. "This here's private property now," Pike announced to the gathering crowd. "Mr. Crow bought the rights fair and square. Anyone wants water needs to see him about terms."
"That's a lie,"
Maggie's voice cracked with desperation.
"This well's been free use since before the town was founded."
Pike produced a paper from his vest, unfolding it with theatrical precision. Railroad Survey Commission says different. Seems when they mapped the territory for the new line. This parcel got included in a sale. All legal and proper. Ruth pushed through the crowd, her father's labored breathing behind her telling her he was following. She took the paper, scanning it quickly. The language was dense with legal terminology, but the signatures looked authentic enough. Including her stomach dropped a familiar name on the witness line. This says the transfer was witnessed by the sheriff's office. Someone in the crowd muttered, and Ruth felt the shift in mood like a change in wind direction. Amos took the paper from his daughter's hands, his face going gray as he read. This is dated 3 months ago, during the quarantine. His voice was barely audible. When half the town was sick and I was trying to keep order with a skeleton crew. Convenient, Ruth said, loud enough for everyone to hear. Sign anything when you're desperate enough. Careful, Miss Holder. Lane spoke for the first time. His scarred face split in an ugly smile. Wouldn't want folks thinking you're calling their sheriff corrupt. The crowd's murmur grew uglier. These were people who'd trusted Amos Holder for near 20 years, but desperation had a way of curdling trust into suspicion faster than milk in the heat. Nobody's calling anybody anything. A new voice cut through the tension. Eli Mercer sat his horse at the edge of the crowd, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else but unable to ignore need when he saw it. Except maybe we're calling this what it is, a man using paper to steal what drought couldn't take. Eli Mercer. Pike's hand drifted toward his gun. Should have figured you'd stick your nose in. Still trying to play hero, how'd that work out for your wife? The crowd went silent. Everyone knew the story how Margaret Mercer had died of diphtheria 2 winters back, how Eli had ridden himself near to death trying to fetch the medicine that came too late. It was cruel to mention it, cruel and calculated. Eli's face never changed, but Ruth saw his knuckles go white on his reins. This isn't about me, it's about Mrs. O'Brien's cattle needing water. Then she can pay for it like everyone else. Lane said, $1 a head, minimum 20 gallons. Mr. Crow's being more than generous. $1 a head, someone in the crowd exclaimed. That's robbery. That's business, the Eastern stranger from the saloon corrected, appearing as if from nowhere atop a horse too fine for frontier work. Mr. Crow has expenses. Maintaining wells, ensuring security, managing distribution, managing to line his pockets. Ruth interrupted. While folks die of thirst. The stranger's smile was thin as paper. Miss Holder, I believe your father has some experience with the complexities of maintaining order during trying times. Perhaps he could explain to these good people why certain compromises are sometimes necessary. Amos swayed slightly, and Ruth stepped closer to him, her hand finding his elbow, but his voice, when he spoke, was steady. Any paper I signed during the quarantine was emergency authorization only, temporary measures. Ah, the stranger's smile widened. But you see, temporary has a way of becoming permanent when properly documented. I'm sure if we examined all the papers from that period, we'd find many interesting interpretations of authority. The threat hung in the air like smoke. Ruth felt her father tense beside her, saw the way his jaw worked as he swallowed words that wanted to emerge. Enough talk, Eli said suddenly. Mrs. O'Brien, bring your cattle around the back trail. There's a stream about 3 miles east, barely a trickle, but it'll do for today. That's our water too, Pike started, but Eli cut him off. No paper saying so, unless, Mr. Crow's bought the whole territory while we weren't looking. He's working on it, Lane muttered, but gestured for his men to let the widow pass. The crowd began to disperse, but the damage was done. Ruth saw it in the sidelong glances at her father, the whispered conversations that stopped when she drew near, seeds of doubt planted with surgical precision. As they headed back to town, Amos riding slightly hunched in his saddle, Ruth found herself looking back. Eli Mercer was helping the O'Brien boys drive the cattle, patient with their clumsy attempts at herding. When he glanced up and caught her watching, something passed between them, understanding, maybe, or recognition of shared burden. "Don't," her father said quietly. "Don't what?" "Whatever you're thinking about Eli Mercer, he's a good man, but he's carrying ghosts. You've got enough weight without adding his." Ruth turned forward, her back straight as the rifle in her saddle scabbard. "We're all carrying something." That evening, as shadows stretched long across Dust Haven's dusty streets, a message arrived at the sheriff's office. Fine paper, expensive ink, Crow's seal pressed deep into burgundy wax. "Ah, Mr. Crow requests the pleasure of your company for dinner tomorrow evening," Ruth read aloud, "to discuss mutually beneficial arrangements regarding the current water situation." Amos crumpled the invitation slowly, methodically. "Mutually beneficial? Man's got a sense of humor." "We have to go," Ruth said, though the words tasted like ash. "Not going looks like guilt or fear." "Or good sense," her father countered, but he was already nodding. "But you're right. We go, we listen, we give away nothing." Outside, the wind was picking up, driving dust through the gaps in the walls, under the doors, into every space that wasn't sealed tight. Ruth lit the oil lamp on her desk, watching the flame flicker and dance. Such a small light against so much darkness, but it held its ground, stubborn and steady. Like hope, she thought, like justice. Like the look in a widowed cowboy's eyes when he chose to stand for what was right, ghosts and all. The lamp flame guttered in a sudden gust, then steadied. Tomorrow would bring new battles, new compromises, new tests of courage. But tonight, in this small circle of light, Ruth Holder allowed herself a moment to believe that David could still beat Goliath, that papers and money and influence couldn't always triumph over simple human decency. A fool's hope, perhaps. But in Dust Haven, in the year 1879, at the edge of civilization where law was still more suggestion than fact, sometimes a fool's hope was the only kind worth having. Asterisk, asterisk, Part 2. Papers and blood, asterisk, asterisk. The Holder house sat modest and weathered at the end of Cottonwood Street, its clapboard sides bearing the scars of 20 Wyoming winters. Inside, the remnants of dinner beef stew stretched thin with potatoes, and hope cooled on the table while Ruth and her father sat in silence that grew heavier with each tick of the mantel clock. "You going to tell me what's really in that paper?" Ruth finally asked, her voice cutting through the quiet like a scalpel. "The one Pike showed at the well. You recognized more than just your office seal." Amos pushed his plate away, the scrape of china on wood harsh in the stillness. He rose, joints protesting, and walked to the cabinet where he kept his important papers. His hands shook slightly as he rifled through the documents, finally producing a folder worn soft with handling. "During the quarantine," he began, his back still to his daughter, "Crow came to me, said he could get medicine from Denver. Enough for the whole town. All he wanted was temporary authority to manage water distribution, said it would help prevent the spread of disease." "And you believed him?" Amos turned, and Ruth saw something in her father's eyes she'd never seen before. Shame, deep and corrosive. "Your mother had just taken sick. Doc Estelle was working with nothing but willow bark and prayer. Yes, I believed him. Or maybe I just needed to." Ruth took the paper he offered, scanning the faded text. There it was, in her father's careful script, temporary emergency authorization for water resource management. But underneath, in smaller print she had to squint to read, were conditions and subclauses that made her stomach turn. "This gives him rights to any newly discovered or previously unrecorded water sources." She read aloud. "Papa, this could mean any, well, spring or stream not specifically deeded before the date of signing." Amos finished. "I know. I figured it out too late. After your mother, He couldn't finish, sinking into his chair like a man carrying stones. Ruth set the paper down carefully, afraid if she gripped it any tighter, she might tear it to pieces. The medicine. Did it even come? 3 days after she died. The words fell between them like lead. Crow expressed his sincere condolences and assured me the paperwork would be filed away, forgotten, emergency measures for emergency times. But he kept it, waited for the drought to make it valuable. That's Bart Crow, patient as a spider and twice as cold. Ruth stood, pacing the small room like a caged cat. We have to fight this. There must be something. With what? Amos's laugh was bitter. He's got legal documents, money for lawyers, influence with the railroad. We've got my word against paper. We've got the truth. Truth. Her father tested the word like foreign currency. How much water will truth buy these days? The next morning brought the weekly market to Dusthaven's Main Street. Farmers and ranchers from miles around set up tables and wagons, trying to sell what the drought hadn't killed. Ruth moved through the crowd, notebook in hand, making her rounds and listening to the pulse of the town. Her tongue heard Crow's hiring more men. And water prices going up again? Sheriff knew all along. Sold us out. The whispers followed her like tumbleweeds. And Ruth kept her chin high, her expression neutral. Near the milliner's shop, she spotted Mei Lin arranging fabric samples on a small table, her movements precise despite the hostile looks from some of the other vendors. Miss Ruth. Mei Lin greeted her with a slight bow that managed to convey both respect and irony. You look tired. Perhaps you need new dress, something in blue to match the circles under your eyes. Despite everything, Ruth found herself almost smiling. Mei Lin had arrived in Dusthaven 3 years ago, the sole survivor of a wagon accident, and had built her business one careful stitch at a time. She had a way of wrapping sharp observations in silk. I need information more than fashion, Ruth said quietly, pretending to examine a bolt of calico. You hear things. What are people saying about the water rights? Mei Lin's fingers never paused in their folding. They say Sheriff signed papers. They say Crow owns half the territory's water now. They say... She glanced around, then leaned closer. They say maybe Sheriff's daughter should be careful, that Crow has plans beyond water. Before Ruth could ask more, a commotion erupted near the livestock pens. Bartholomew Crow himself had arrived, dressed in a black suit that seemed to absorb the morning light. He moved through the market like a lord reviewing his holdings, his men forming a subtle perimeter around him. When he reached Ruth, he stopped, removing his hat with elaborate courtesy. Miss Holder, radiant as always, despite these trying times. Mr. Crow. Ruth kept her voice level, though her hand itched for the colt on her hip, the one her father didn't know she carried. I have something for you. He produced a wrapped package from thin air, or rather, from the hands of an assistant who materialized at his elbow. A small token of my esteem. Ruth made no move to take it. I don't accept gifts from concerned citizens. Crow's smile never wavered as he personally unwrapped the package, revealing a beautiful blue silk scarf. Please, it would complement your eyes wonderfully. And a lady should have nice things, especially one who works so hard for her community. The crowd had gathered, watching. Ruth felt the weight of their attention. The trap Crow was laying, refuse and seem ungracious, proud, accept and appear bought. She took a different path. How thoughtful. I'm sure the Widows' Aid Society will appreciate your donation. She plucked the scarf from his hands and walked directly to where Mrs. O'Brien stood with her boys. Maggie, Mr. Crow has generously donated this for the next charity auction. The widow's eyes widened, but she took the cue. How kind. Crow's smile tightened infinitesimally. Charitable, just like your father. The emphasis on the last word was subtle but unmistakable. I do hope you'll both still join me for dinner. I have propositions that could benefit everyone. Propositions? Ruth tasted the word. Is that what you call them? I call them opportunities. For instance, did you know the railroad is planning a new line? They'll need water rights secured all along the route. A man or woman with the right connections could ensure their community prospers. Or bleeds dry. Crow replaced his hat, the gesture somehow managing to be both dismissive and threatening. Such violent imagery, Miss Holder. Perhaps you've been spending too much time with rough company. Mr. Mercer, for instance. A man burdened by tragedy can be unpredictable. Ruth's spine stiffened. Eli Mercer is worth 10. Yes? Crow leaned in. Interested. Do go on. Worth 10 of whom? Exactly. She'd walked into that one. Ruth realized. Any answer would give him ammunition. So she chose silence, meeting his gaze steadily until he chuckled and moved on. His entourage flowing around him like oil on water. That afternoon, Ruth rode out to the Rocking J Ranch where Eli worked. She found him in the north pasture, helping repair a section of fence that had come down in the night winds. Jonah was with him, chattering about nothing and everything while they worked. "Miss Ruth," Jonah called out, then caught himself. "I mean, deputy, Miss Deputy." "Ruth's fine. Jonah." She dismounted, ground tying her horse with the casual competence of someone raised in the saddle. "Eli, we need to talk." Eli straightened, reading something in her face. "Jonah, why don't you check the water trough in the south field?" "But we just—" The boy caught Eli's look and subsided. "Yes, sir. Nice seeing you, Miss Ruth." When he was gone, Eli turned back to the fence, giving his hands something to do. "Crow causing more trouble." "When isn't he?" Ruth moved closer, noting the efficient economy of Eli's movements, the way he never wasted a motion. He made threats today, veiled ones, but threats all the same. About you. Eli's hands paused for just a moment. Man likes his games. This isn't a game. He's systematically taking control of every water source in the territory. And he's got papers saying my father gave him the right. Your father's a good man. Good men make mistakes. The words came out harder than she intended. Especially when their wives are dying and snake oil salesmen promise miracles. Eli set down his tools, finally meeting her eyes. "Speaking from experience, my mother died anyway. The medicine came too late." Ruth hadn't meant to say that, hadn't meant to open that particular wound. Now Crow's using her death to steal from everyone else. Ruth. The way he said her name, soft and careful, made something in her chest tighten. Your father did what he thought was right. We all make bargains we regret when death's knocking. Is that what you tell yourself about Margaret? The question hung between them like a blade. Eli's face closed off, that careful blankness she'd seen him wear like armor. I tell myself a lot of things, he said finally. Doesn't make them true. They stood in silence, the wind picking up dust devils in the distance. Ruth knew she should go, knew this conversation was veering into dangerous territory, but something kept her rooted. Crow mentioned you specifically. She said, called you unpredictable, burdened by tragedy. Man's not wrong. He's not right either. Ruth stepped closer, close enough to see the lines grief had carved around his eyes. You're the most predictable man I know. Eli Mercer. Predictably decent, predictably stubborn about doing what's right even when it costs you. That predictability didn't save Margaret. And my father's badge didn't save my mother. But we're still here, still fighting. That has to count for something. Eli looked at her then, really looked at her, and Ruth felt exposed in a way that had nothing to do with the sun beating down. Why are you here? Ruth, really? I need to find evidence that Crow's claim is fraudulent. The paperwork must have witnesses, notarizations. if any of those are forged or coerced. You want me to help you investigate? I want someone I can trust watching my back.
Your father
is dying. The words escaped before she could stop them. Oh, he won't admit it. Probably doesn't even realize it himself. But I've seen how Doc Estelle looks at him. The lung fever he caught during the quarantine never really left. He pushes himself because he thinks he has to, because he's trying to make up for... She gestured helplessly. For surviving when your mother didn't. Ruth nodded, not trusting her voice. Eli picked up his hammer again, but his movements were thoughtful now. The church keeps records, marriage certificates, death notices, property transfers. Deacon Harlan's been there 30 years. He'd know if something wasn't right. Would he talk to a pretty woman asking nicely, maybe? To a sheriff's daughter asking officially? That's harder to say. Then I'll have to be very nice. Something that might have been a smile ghosted across Eli's features. Just be careful. Crow didn't get where he is by letting people poke around in his business without consequences. As if summoned by his name. Dust on the horizon announced approaching riders. 3 men, moving fast. Eli stepped automatically between Ruth and the approaching trouble, and she let him, recognizing Pike and Sutter Lane even at a distance. They reined in hard, horses lathered and blowing. Pike's grin was sharp as broken glass. Well, Miss Holder, your daddy know you're out here unchaperoned. My father knows I'm doing my job. Ruth replied evenly. Which is more than I can say for you. Pike, don't you have some widows to threaten? Lane chuckled. The sound like rocks grinding. Feisty. Boss likes that in a woman. Makes them more fun to break. Eli's whole body went still. That particular stillness that preceded violence. Ruth put a hand on his arm, feeling the tension coiled there like a spring. Gentlemen, she said, putting ironic emphasis on the word. Unless you have business here, I suggest you move along. Oh, we got business, Pike said. Message for Mercer. Boss wants to hire him. Good wages, steady work. All he's got to do is be reasonable about things. Not interested, Eli said flatly. Didn't ask if you were interested. Man's gotta eat. Ranch work dries up when the water does. I'll manage. Lane leaned forward in his saddle. What about that boy always following you around? Shame if something happened to him. Accidents are common in drought times. People get desperate, do desperate things. The threat against Jonah was the match to Eli's fuse. He moved faster than Ruth would have thought possible, grabbing Lane's belt and hauling him half out of the saddle before Pike's drawn gun stopped him. Easy now, Pike said, thumb on the hammer. No need for unpleasantness. We're just talking. Talk's over, Ruth said, her own hand resting on her Colt. Ride on. For a moment, the tableau held 4 people balanced on the edge of violence, dust swirling around them like an audience. Then Lane laughed, settling back in his saddle. This ain't over. Mercer, boss gets what he wants, one way or another. He touched his hat brim mockingly to Ruth. Ma'am. They rode off, leaving dust and danger in their wake. Eli's hands were clenched, knuckles white with the effort of restraint. They threatened Jonah, he said, voice rough. I heard. Ruth squeezed his arm gently. We won't let anything happen to him. We. Eli looked down at her hand on his arm, then up at her face. This isn't your fight. It became my fight the moment Crow used my mother's death to steal from people. Ruth stepped back, squaring her shoulders. I'm going to talk to Deacon Harlan, then I'm having dinner with the devil himself. And somewhere in all that, I'm going to find what we need to stop him. Ruth. Don't. She moved toward her horse. Don't tell me to be careful. Don't tell me it's too dangerous. And definitely don't tell me to leave it to the men. I was going to say be armed. Eli handed her a leather-wrapped bundle he'd pulled from his saddlebag. It was Margaret's Derringer, .41 caliber, small enough to hide, big enough to matter. Ruth unwrapped it carefully, revealing a pearl-handled gun that gleamed despite its years. "Eli, I can't—" "She would have liked you," he said simply. "Would have liked knowing it was protecting someone who fights for others." Ruth slipped the small gun into her boot, feeling its weight like a promise. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet. Just come back alive." As she rode away, Ruth felt the weight of more than just the gun. She carried the trust of a man who'd lost everything, the hopes of a town being bled dry, and the legacy of parents who'd tried to do right and fallen short. Tomorrow she would dine with the devil. Tonight she would prepare for war. Asterisk, asterisk. Part 3, Dry Storm, asterisk, asterisk. The sky wore the color of old brass, heavy and metallic, pressing down on Dust Haven like a flat iron. 3 weeks without rain had turned the earth to powder, and every breath tasted of alkali and defeat. Ruth stood at her father's office window, watching dust devils dance down Main Street like drunken spirits. 60 head, Amos said behind her, his voice interrupted by a wet cough. "That's how many cattle Tom Morrison lost yesterday? Just dropped where they stood, tongues swollen black. The creek, bone dry, has been for a week." He shuffled papers on his desk, each movement careful and measured. "Crow's offering to sell water at $2 per 100 gallons. Delivered." $2. Ruth spun from the window. "That's 3 times what he charged last week." Supply and demand. Her father's bitter smile turned into another coughing fit. This one lasted longer, bending him double, and when he finally straightened, Ruth saw the speckled red on his handkerchief before he could hide it. "Papa." "Don't." He waved her off, tucking the evidence away. "We have bigger problems. There's talk of a town meeting tonight. Folks want answers about the water rights." Ruth had been dreading this. "What will you tell them?" "The truth, that I made a bad bargain trying to save lives, and now we're all paying for it." Before Ruth could respond, the door burst open. Jonah Bell stumbled in, face flushed with heat and urgency. "Miss Ruth, Sheriff, you gotta come quick." "Slow down, boy." Amos gripped the desk as he stood. "What's happened?" "It's Mr. Eli, sir. He was bringing water barrels from the Turner place when he collapsed, right in the middle of the salt flats. I ran fast as I could." Ruth was already moving, checking her gun belt. "How far?" 3 miles, maybe 4. I left my horse with him. But in this heat—" "I'll go," Ruth said. But Amos was already reaching for his hat. "We'll both go. Jonah, run to Doc Estelle's. Tell her to follow." He looked at Ruth's face and added quietly, "I'm still sheriff of this town." The ride out was brutal. The heat rose in waves from the baked earth, making the horizon shimmer like water-cruel mockery in this dried-out land. Ruth pushed her mare hard, her father keeping pace despite the wheeze she could hear even over the pounding hooves. They found Eli sprawled beside an overturned wagon, water barrels split and empty, their precious contents already absorbed by the thirsty ground. Jonah's horse stood nearby, head low, sides heaving. Ruth was off her mount before it fully stopped, dropping to her knees beside Eli. His skin was burning, dry as paper. "Eli, can you hear me?" His eyes fluttered open, focusing with effort. "Ruth, you shouldn't— the sun—" "Quiet." She unslung her canteen, supporting his head as she dribbled water between his cracked lips. "Save your strength." Amos examined the wagon, his face grim. "Axle's been cut near through. Sabotage. Crow's men." "Who else?" He kicked at the spilled barrels. 20 gallons, maybe more. Would have kept the Turner family going another week. Ruth felt Eli trying to sit up and pressed him back down. "Don't be stupid." "Have to warn others." His hand caught hers. Grip weak but insistent. "Pike was talking. In town. Something about tonight." The meeting. Eli nodded, wincing. More than talk. Heard him say, "Light them up." Doc Estelle arrived in a cloud of dust, her medical bag already in hand. "Heat exhaustion," she diagnosed quickly. "Maybe worse. We need to get him somewhere cool." "My place is closest," Amos said, then doubled over, coughing. This time he couldn't hide the blood. "Looks like I've got 2 patients," Doc Estelle observed dryly. "Ruth, can you help me get them both in my wagon?" "I can ride," both men said in unison, then glared at each other. "Men," the doctor muttered. "Ruth, talk sense into them while I prepare some wet cloths." Ruth looked between her father and Eli, both stubborn as mules and twice as prideful. "Fine, you can both ride, but you'll do exactly as Doc Estelle says, or I'll hog-tie you both and drag you behind the wagon. Clear." The ghost of a smile crossed Eli's face. "Yes, ma'am." The ride back was tense, Ruth supporting Eli while keeping an anxious eye on her father. The doc's wagon moved slowly, every bump threatening to topple one or both of her patients. By the time they reached town, word had spread. A crowd was gathering, faces dark with worry and anger. "Is it true," someone called out, "about the water wagons being hit?" "Ask Crow," another voice shouted. "Ask him why honest folk die of thirst while he hoards every drop." Mei Lin appeared at Ruth's elbow as they helped Eli into the doctor's office. "Bad timing," she murmured. "Or perhaps good timing, depending on whose side you're on. Crow's men have been buying drinks all afternoon, boasting about something." "Jonah said Pike mentioned lighting something up," Ruth said quietly. Mei Lin's face went still. "The hay barn, where they're holding the meeting. If that catches fire..." Ruth's blood turned cold despite the heat. The hay barn was the largest building in town, the only one big enough to hold everyone, packed with drought-dry fodder and frightened people. It would be a death trap. "Stay with them," Ruth told Mei Lin, indicating Eli and her father. "Make sure they don't do anything stupid." "And you..." "I'm going to make sure nobody lights any matches." The sun was setting by the time Ruth reached the barn, painting the sky the color of dried blood. People were already streaming in, their faces set with the determination of folk pushed too far. She spotted Deacon Harlan near the door, his usually calm demeanor replaced by nervous energy. "Deacon," she called, pulling him aside. "We need to postpone this meeting." "I'm afraid it's too late for that, Miss Ruth." His hands trembled as he mopped his brow. "People want answers. They want justice." "They'll get ashes if we're not careful. I have reason to believe." "Sheriff Holder," a woman's voice cut through the crowd. Maggie O'Brien pushed forward, her boys clutching her skirts. "Is it true you signed away our water rights, that you sold us out for medicine that didn't even come in time?" The crowd's murmur grew ugly. Ruth stepped in front of the deacon, raising her voice. "My father made a decision during desperate times. He's not the villain here." "Then who is?" someone shouted. "'Cause from where I stand, looks like the law's been in Crow's pocket all along. You want to know who's to blame?" Ruth let her anger show, using it like a shield. "Look at the man who's charging double for water while you bury your cattle. Look at who benefits every time another family gives up and moves on." Pretty words. This from a man she didn't recognize, one of the recent arrivals drawn by railroad work. But words don't water stock or feed children. The crowd pressed closer, and Ruth felt the situation spiraling. Where were Crow's men if they planned to burn the barn? Wouldn't they want to be far away when... She smelled it first. Kerosene. Just a whiff, but enough to set every nerve screaming. "Everyone out now." But her warning came too late. The first flames licked up the back wall, spreading with hungry speed through the tinder-dry wood. Panic erupted as people pushed for the doors, screaming, shoving, trampling. Ruth fought against the tide, looking for those who'd fallen, who couldn't move fast enough. She hauled Widow Henderson to her feet, past a crying child over the heads of the crowd to safety. The smoke was thickening, turning the air to poison. "The loft!" someone screamed, and Ruth looked up to see two figures trapped above some of the younger boys who'd climbed up for a better view. Without thinking, she grabbed a coiled rope from the wall and headed for the ladder. The heat was incredible, flames already eating at the supports. She climbed anyway, feeling the wood groan beneath her weight. "Jump!" she yelled to the boys when she reached the top. "I'll catch you." They were frozen with terror. No time for gentle persuasion. Ruth grabbed the nearest one of the Turner boys and simply threw him over her shoulder, descending the ladder as fast as she dared. Hands reached up to take him when she got low enough, and she went back for the second. This time the ladder gave way halfway down. Ruth managed to push the boy toward waiting arms before she fell, hitting the ground hard enough to drive all breath from her lungs. Strong hands hauled her toward the door. She caught a glimpse of Eli's face, tight with pain and determination, before fresh air hit her lungs and she could focus on breathing. The barn was fully engulfed now, flames reaching toward the darkening sky like desperate prayers. The bucket brigade that formed was pitifully inadequate, but people tried anyway, passing water hand to hand in a futile battle against destruction. "Let it burn." The voice cut through the chaos like a knife. Bartholomew Crow sat his horse at the edge of the firelight, immaculate despite the ash falling like snow. His men flanked him, weapons visible but not quite drawn. "Unfortunate," he continued, raising his voice to carry. "But perhaps it's a sign. When the old ways burn, new ones can grow from the ashes. I'm prepared to offer employment to any man willing to work. Water included, of course. All you have to do is see reason." "You did this," Ruth accused, stepping forward despite the restraining hands that reached for her. "You burned it." "Careful, Miss Holder." Crow's smile was cold as winter moonlight. "Accusations without proof are dangerous. Your father can attest to that." "My father," Ruth began, then stopped. Amos had appeared, supported between Doc Estelle and the deacon, his face gray but his badge still pinned to his chest. "Crow," he said, and his voice carried despite its weakness. "You're under arrest." Laughter rippled through Crow's men. "On what charges? Sheriff being a successful businessman." "Conspiracy, fraud, attempted murder." Amos straightened, shaking off the supporting hands. "I've been going through the old records. That emergency ordinance you're waving around? It expired 30 days after signing. All emergency measures were to be reviewed by the town council. You never brought it up. It's been invalid for over 2 years. The smile slipped from Crow's face. "You're lying." "Deacon Harlan has the council minutes. Don't you, Deacon?" All eyes turned to the trembling minister. He clutched a leather-bound book to his chest, knuckles white. That is, Mr. Crow said." "What did I say?" Crow's voice was silk over steel. "Be very careful, Deacon. Words have consequences." Ruth saw the moment the old man broke. He'd held the secret too long. Let fear rule him, and now faced with the burning barn and the desperate faces of his congregation. Something snapped. "You said you'd burn my church if I showed anyone." The words poured out like water from a broken dam. "Said you'd make it look like an accident, just like Thompson's store in the Grange Hall." Silence fell, broken only by the crackle of flames. Then someone said, "Thompson's store weren't no accident." "My cousin died in that fire. The Grange Hall had all our seed stores." The crowd's mood shifted, fear transforming to rage. Crow's men reached for their weapons, but now they faced not a mob, but a community united in fury. "Stand down," Amos commanded, and remarkably, they listened. Even Crow's hired guns could count, and the odds had shifted dramatically. "Crow, I'm asking you once more. Submit to arrest, or things get ugly." "You're a dead man. Holder." Crow snarled. but he dismounted, hands carefully visible. "You and your meddling daughter both. This isn't over." "No," Ruth agreed, stepping up beside her father. "It's just beginning." As Crow was led away, his men melting into the darkness rather than test the crowd's mood, Ruth felt Eli's hand on her shoulder. "That was brave," he said quietly. "Stupid, but brave. Learned from the best," she replied, looking at her father. Amos was leaning heavily on Doc Estelle again, but his eyes were clear, proud. "We'll need to post guards," he said. "Crow's men won't give up easy." "I'll organize watches," Eli offered, then swayed slightly. "Tomorrow. Tonight, I think we all need rest." As the crowd began to disperse, Ruth noticed something. The fire was dying, beaten back not by water but by a sudden wind from the mountains, and on that wind, she could swear she smelled rain. "Storm coming," Mei Lin said, appearing beside them with her uncanny timing. "Not tonight, maybe not tomorrow, but soon." Ruth looked at the smoldering ruins of the barn, at her father being helped toward home, at Eli standing steadfast despite his obvious exhaustion. A storm was coming. All right, but for the first time in months. She wondered if it might bring salvation instead of destruction. Thunder rumbled in the distance, and somewhere in the darkness, a night bird called the first wildlife sound she'd heard in weeks, life returning to a land that had seemed forsaken. Hope was a dangerous thing in drought times. But tonight, with Crow in chains and rain on the wind, Ruth allowed herself just a taste of it. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Tonight, they had won a victory, small but significant. And sometimes that was enough. Asterisk, asterisk, Part 4. Things Unspoken. Asterisk, asterisk. The morning after the fire dawned gray and still, ash hanging in the air like memories of violence. Ruth sat at Mei Lin's kitchen table, watching the seamstress's nimble fingers work on a dress that would never see a dance floor, not in Dusthaven, where celebrations had become as rare as rain. "You refused him," Mei Lin said without preamble, not looking up from her stitching. "Crow's proposal. The whole town knows." "There was no proposal, just threats wrapped in silk. Silk can strangle as surely as rope." Mei Lin set down her needle, fixing Ruth with dark eyes that had seen too much. "In my country, we have saying, when dragon offers gold, wise woman counts her scales." Ruth fingered the coffee cup, its warmth the only comfort in the cool morning. "Your country, you never talk about it. Some stories are better left buried." Mei Lin resumed her work. "But I tell you this, I know what it is to have powerful man think he owns you, to have whole town watch and whisper while you stand alone. I'm not alone. No, your father grows weaker. That cowboy carries ghosts. The good people of Dusthaven." She gestured toward the window, where people hurried past without looking at the sheriff's daughter. "They grateful now, but gratitude has short memory." As if to prove her point, Mrs. Henderson passed by, clutching her shawl tight and deliberately crossing to the other side of the street when she saw Ruth through the window. "Let me make you something," Mei Lin said suddenly, "for Thanksgiving service. Something that says you are woman to be respected, not pitied or possessed. I don't need—" "You need armor. Every woman does. Mine is silk and scissors. Yours is leather and law. But sometimes—" She held up a length of deep blue fabric. "Sometimes we must remind them we are also ladies, that we choose strength, not born to it like men think." Ruth found herself smiling despite everything. "All right, but nothing fancy. I still need to ride and work. I make you something both beautiful and practical. Like you." The compliment caught Ruth off guard, and she covered by standing abruptly. "I should go. Promise to check on the Turners, see how they're managing." "Ruth," Mei Lin's voice stopped her at the door. "That derringer in your boot is good gun, but remember, sometimes sharpest weapon is letting them think you helpless." Outside, the air still tasted of smoke. Ruth made her rounds, noting the suspicious looks, the conversations that died when she approached. Crow was in jail, but his money and influence lingered like infection in a wound. She found Eli at the rocking jay, working alone on a broken fence line. His movements were careful, still feeling yesterday's collapse, but his hands were steady. "Shouldn't you be resting?" she asked, dismounting. "Work doesn't stop for tired." He didn't look up, but she saw the slight ease in his shoulders at her presence. "How's your father?" "Stubborn. Doc Estelle wants him on bed rest. He's at his desk reviewing case law." Apple didn't fall far. Now he did look at her, and something in his expression made her stomach flutter. "You saved those boys yesterday?" "Anyone would have—" "No." The word was quiet but firm. "Most would have saved themselves. You didn't even hesitate." They worked in companionable silence for a while, Ruth holding posts while Eli secured them. The sun climbed higher, burning off the ash-gray sky to reveal hard blue beneath. "Tell me about her," Ruth said suddenly. "Margaret." Eli's hands stilled. For a long moment, she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "She laughed at everything, even my terrible jokes. Had this way of finding joy in small things, first green shoots in spring. Coffee on cold mornings, the way light hit the mountains at sunset. You loved her. More than I knew was possible." He resumed working, but his voice carried pain worn smooth by time. "The fever took her in 3 days. I rode to Denver. Near killed my horse getting there. Doctor sold me medicine. Swore it would help. Cost everything I had saved. But I didn't care." Ruth waited, knowing the weight of untold stories. Got back to find her already gone. Been dead 6 hours. They said medicine wouldn't have helped anyway. Doctor admitted later he knew it was too late. Sold it to me anyway. His laugh was bitter. I wanted to kill him. Almost did, but Margaret wouldn't have wanted that. So you carry it instead. The guilt. Man should carry his failures. Reminds him what they cost. Ruth moved closer. Close enough to see the scars on his hands from years of honest work. The gray just starting at his temples. "My mother used to say guilt was like trying to ride backwards. You can't see where you're going, and you'll likely fall off besides." Smart woman. She also said the only way to honor the dead was to keep living, full and proper. Eli met her eyes then, and Ruth felt the air between them change, charged with possibility and fear. That why you risk yourself to honor her. Maybe. Or maybe I'm just too stubborn to let men like Crow win. That stubbornness will get you killed. Better than dying slow of silence and submission. He studied her face like a man reading map of dangerous territory. You ever think about leaving, starting over somewhere without all this weight? Every day. The admission surprised her. Then I remember wherever I go, there'll be another Crow, another drought, another fight. Might as well make my stand where I know the ground. And if you had someone to stand with... The question hung between them like morning mist. Ruth's heart hammered. But before she could answer, hoofbeats announced company. They stepped apart as Jonah rode up, face flushed with exertion. "Miss Ruth Eli, you gotta come quick. It's the jail." Ice formed in Ruth's stomach. "Crow!" He's still there, but barely. His men came calling. "Deputy Collins is down, maybe dead. Your pa's holding them off." But Ruth was already mounting. "How many?" 6, maybe 7. They got rifles. "Jonah, ride to the Martins, the Turners, anyone who'll come." She looked at Eli. "You don't have to." "Like hell." He swung into his saddle with grimace of pain that he couldn't quite hide. "Let's go." The ride to town was a blur of dust and dread. They heard the gunfire before they saw the jail-sharp cracks that echoed off buildings and sent townspeople scurrying for cover. Ruth counted muzzle flashes from windows. doorways. Her father had turned the jail into a fortress, but he couldn't hold forever.
Around back,
She told Eli, pulling her rifle from its scabbard.
I'll go high. You go low.
Ruth. He caught her arm. Be careful. You too. They split up, Ruth climbing to the roof of the hardware store while Eli disappeared into the alley. From her vantage point, she could see the situation clear. 4 men had the front covered while others worked on the side door. Her father's rifle barrel poked from a window, but his return fire was sporadic, running low on ammunition, or strength, or both. Ruth sighted down her rifle, picking her target, the man at the side door, trying to jimmy the lock. She squeezed the trigger, watched him spin and fall. The others scattered, seeking cover, shouting confusion. Up high hardware store. Bullets chewed into the roof around her, and Ruth rolled, came up firing. Another man down, but they were adjusting now, flanking her position. Time to move. She dropped through the skylight, landing hard in the storeroom. Through the window, she saw Eli emerge from cover, his pistol speaking with deadly precision. 2 more attackers fell before the others realized they were caught in crossfire.
Fall back,
Someone shouted Pike's voice. Get to the horses! The remaining attackers retreated, firing wild shots to cover their escape. Ruth burst from the store as they mounted up, her rifle tracking Pike as he spurred his horse. The shot was there, clean and clear. She didn't take it. Let the law handle him proper. They'd won this round. The jail door opened and Amos appeared, leaning heavy on the doorframe. Blood seeped through his shirt, not from today's fight, Ruth realized with dawning horror, but from the persistent cough that had finally torn something inside. Papa. She reached him as his knees buckled, catching his weight. He was lighter than he should be, worn thin by duty and disease. Got them on the run, he wheezed, trying to smile. You and Eli, good team. Save your strength. But he gripped her hand, urgent. Listen, Crow. He showed me something. During his threats, paper from the railroad. They're planning something bigger than water rights. The whole valley. They want to force everyone out. Make it a shipping hub. Later, Papa, let's get you to Doc Estelle. No. His grip tightened. You need to know. In my desk, bottom drawer. Evidence I've been gathering. But Ruth, he coughed, specks of blood on his lips. Can't do this officially. Too many bought judges. Has to be different kind of justice. Eli appeared, helping support Amos's weight. Together they carried him to the doctor's office, where Estelle took one look and ordered everyone out except Ruth. I need to examine him properly. Ruth, you can stay, but you. She pointed at Eli. Wait outside. The next hour passed in a blur of medical terminology and quiet efficiency. Ruth held her father's hand as Doc Estelle worked, trying not to see how translucent his skin looked, how each breath seemed a monumental effort. Consumption, the doctor finally said, washing her hands. Advanced. The smoke from yesterday accelerated things, but this has been building for months. How long? Estelle's face was answer enough. I see. Ruth's voice came out steady, surprising herself. What can we do? Keep him comfortable. No more exertion. The sanatorium in Denver might... No. Amos's voice was thread-thin but determined. Not leaving? Not with Crow still a threat? Not with my daughter? He looked at Ruth. You're ready. Been ready for a while. Official or not, you're the law in Dust Haven now. Papa, let me finish what I started wrong. His eyes found hers, still sharp despite the weakness of his body. But promise me don't let revenge eat you hollow. Your mother wouldn't want that. I don't want that. Ruth nodded, not trusting her voice. Later, she stood outside the doctor's office, watching the sun sink toward the mountains. Eli waited with her. Solid and silent presence.
He's dying,
she said finally. Yes. And Crow's still out there. His men will come back. Yes. She turned to face him.
I can't ask you to.
You're not asking. Eli stepped closer, and Ruth could see her reflection in his eyes. I'm choosing. Same as you. This isn't your fight. Ruth. The way he said her name made her breath catch. It became my fight the moment I watched you walk into that burning barn. Maybe before. Maybe the first time I saw you refuse to back down from bigger men with bigger guns.
I'm scared,
she admitted, the words surprising her. Good. Means you're not a fool. His hand found hers, calloused and warm. But scared doesn't mean alone. Thunder rumbled in the distance, and the wind picked up, carrying the scent of rain. Change coming, whether for good or ill. There's something else, Ruth said, remembering her father's words. Evidence he gathered about the railroad's plans. We need to... Tomorrow, Eli interrupted gently. Tonight, you stay with your father. Let others stand guard for once. But... no arguments. Jonah's already organizing shifts. May Lynn's bringing food. Even Deacon Harlan found his backbone. Says he'll watch from the church tower. A slight smile crossed his face. Seems saving those boys yesterday reminded folks what they're fighting for. Ruth felt tears threaten for the first time all day. I don't know if I can do this. Lead them, be what they need. You already are. Eli squeezed her hand before letting go. Have been for a while. Everyone knows it but you. He left her standing there, watching the storm build over the mountains. Inside, her father slept, each breath a small victory. Outside, the town prepared for war. Between them stood Ruth Holder. No longer just the sheriff's daughter, but something more, a woman forged by loss and tempered by duty, preparing to face whatever storms were coming. The first drops of rain began to fall as she went back inside, and Ruth chose to take it as a sign. Even the longest drought eventually ends. The question was whether they'd survive the breaking of it. Asterisk, asterisk, Part 5. The Price of Water. Asterisk, asterisk. The courthouse in Dust Haven had seen better days. Paint peeled from its walls like diseased skin, and the floorboards groaned under the weight of more people than the building was meant to hold. Ruth sat straight-backed in the front row, her father's badge heavy in her pocket, though she had no legal right to wear it. Beside her, Amos slumped in his chair, each breath a conscious effort. Judge Carlton Weatherby presided from behind a desk that served as bench a circuit judge who smelled of whiskey and looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. Crow's lawyer, a sharp-dressed man from Denver named Pemberton, moved through the courtroom like a snake through grass. Your Honor, Pemberton addressed the judge with oily deference. My client's rights in this matter are clear and documented. The emergency ordinance signed by Sheriff Holder grants Mr. Crow authority over water distribution in times of crisis. The current drought certainly qualifies. Ruth felt her father tense beside her. Doc Estelle had advised against him attending, but Amos had insisted, my mess to face. He'd wheezed. Furthermore, Pemberton continued, producing papers with a flourish. The territorial survey clearly shows the North Well and surrounding aquifers fall within parcels legitimately purchased by my client through the Railroad Commission. Legitimately. The word escaped Ruth before she could stop it. Judge Weatherby's gavel came down hard. Young woman, you'll remain silent or be removed. Your Honor. Ruth stood, ignoring the judge's scowl. I have evidence. You have no standing in this court, Miss Holder. Sit down. Let her speak. The voice came from the back of the room. Eli Mercer stood by the door, hat in hand but steel in his tone. Woman saved half this town from burning. Least we can do is hear her out. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. The judge's face darkened. but he nodded curtly. Make it brief. Ruth moved forward, pulling out the documents she and Eli had found in her father's desk. These are the original town charter and the council meeting minutes. Any emergency measure lasting longer than 30 days requires council approval. The water ordinance was never brought before them. A technicality, Pemberton dismissed. In times of crisis, the crisis ended 2 years ago. Ruth interrupted. But Mr. Crow continued exercising emergency powers. That's not law, that's theft. Inflammatory language, Pemberton objected. Truth often is. Ruth turned to address the crowd as much as the judge. But there's more. This map shows the proposed railroad expansion. Notice how it runs exactly through the properties Mr. Crow has been acquiring through water rights pressure. She spread the map on the judge's desk, pointing to the marked routes. Every family forced out by drought and debt, their land ends up in Crow's hands, then sold to the railroad at 10 times what he paid. It's not about water, it's about forcing us off our land. Speculation and conspiracy theories, Pemberton protested, but sweat beaded on his forehead. Is it? Ruth produced another document. This is a letter from the Railroad Commission to Mr. Crow, dated 6 months ago. It discusses the favorable terms for acquiring the necessary parcels for the new hub. Written before the worst of the drought hit, almost like he knew what was coming. Crow himself stood suddenly, his composure cracking. Your Honor, I've endured enough of this girl's fantasies. Girl, Ruth wheeled on him. This girl pulled your hired thugs off innocent families. This girl watched you strangle our town drop by drop. Call me whatever you want. Crow. But everyone here knows what you are, a vulture feeding on desperation. Order. Judge Weatherby hammered his gavel. Miss Holder, you're in contempt. Then hold me in contempt. Ruth shot back. But look at these documents first. Or are you too deep in Crow's pocket to care about justice? The courtroom erupted. Some shouted support for Ruth, others called for order. In the chaos, Ruth saw Pemberton lean close to Crow, whispering urgently. The judge was banging his gavel like a man trying to hammer down his own conscience. Enough! Amos Holder's voice cut through the noise. He stood, swaying but determined, blood specking his handkerchief. The room fell silent out of decades of respect. Your Honor, Amos said formally, I signed that ordinance, my responsibility, but I signed it under false pretenses. To save lives during plague, Mr. Crow promised medicine that came too late, water distribution that never happened fair. He paused, gathering strength. I failed this town once, won't do it again. Everything my daughter says is true. I've got the receipts, the correspondence. Crow planned this before the drought, used my desperation against us all. Sheriff Holder, the judge began, but Amos wasn't finished. I'm dying, Carlton. The use of the judge's first name made the man flinch. Got maybe weeks, maybe days. Could have spent them quiet, letting this all pass. But I look at these people, my people, and I can't. That ordinance was signed under duress and expired years ago. Any judge worth his oath would see that. The judge's face cycled through emotions, anger, fear, something that might have been shame. The silence stretched until Pemberton cleared his throat. Your Honor, perhaps a recess. No. Ruth stepped forward again. No more delays, no more legal tricks. These people need water today. Their cattle are dying. Their children are suffering. How many more have to pay for Crow's greed? The law, Pemberton began. The law should serve justice, not strangle it. Ruth pulled out one final paper. This is a petition signed by 300 citizens of Dusthaven, calling for immediate release of the water rights and investigation into Mr. Crow's dealings. That's nearly every adult in town. Are you going to ignore them all? Judge Weatherby looked at the petition, at the crowd, at Crow's increasingly red face. The courthouse felt like a powder keg waiting for a spark. This is ridiculous, Crow exploded. I have invested thousands in this territory, the improvements, the infrastructure built on stolen water and broken promises. Someone called from the crowd.
I made this town viable.
Crow's controlled facade finally cracked completely. Without me, you'd all be scratching dust. I deserve compensation for my vision.
You deserve a rope.
This from the back. And suddenly the crowd's mood shifted dangerous. Eli moved quickly, positioning himself between Crow and the angry townspeople.
Nobody's lynching anybody. We do this legal.
Legal. Crow laughed, ugly and sharp. You think any of this matters? I own judges from here to Denver. I've got the railroad behind me. You win today. I'll be back tomorrow with federal marshals and... The gunshot cut him off. Not from inside, from outside. The front window exploded in a shower of glass as riders thundered past. Pike's voice carried over the hoofbeats. Boss, we got trouble. More shots. The crowd dove for cover as bullets chewed into the courthouse walls. Ruth found herself pressed against the floor, her father beneath her, protecting him with her body. She could hear Eli returning fire, the steady bark of his pistol.
The roof!
Someone yelled.
They're on the roof!
Smoke began seeping through the ceiling. Like the barn, Ruth thought wildly.
They're going to burn us out.
Everyone out the back. She helped her father to his feet, supporting his weight. The crowd pushed toward the rear exit, panic rising with the smoke. Judge Weatherby had abandoned all pretense of dignity. Diving under his desk, Pemberton was already gone, probably out the window the moment trouble started. But Crow stood in the middle of the chaos, smiling like a man watching a plan come together. Now you can't fight money and influence a girl, he called to Ruth. Burn the whole town if I have to. Railroad wants this land clear anyway. Ruth saw Eli moving toward Crow and made a decision that would haunt her. Instead of stopping him, she focused on getting her father out, on helping the panicking crowd escape the burning building. The last thing she saw before smoke obscured everything was Eli's fist connecting with Crow's jaw. Outside was chaos. Crow's men had positioned themselves strategically, controlling the streets with rifle fire, but they'd miscalculated the townspeople weren't running. Instead, they armed themselves with whatever came to hand and fought back. Ruth deposited her father with Doc Estelle and grabbed a rifle from a fallen attacker. The battle for Dust Haven had begun in earnest, and legal niceties were burning with the courthouse. She found cover behind a water trough ironic, given what they were fighting over, and picked her targets carefully. These weren't the hardened gunmen Crow usually employed. These were railroad men, hired muscle who'd expected easy prey. Ruth May Lynn appeared beside her, improbably carrying a shotgun. The church deacon has the women and children there. But even as she spoke, flames began licking at the church walls. They weren't just burning the courthouse, they were trying to destroy the whole town. No! The word tore from Ruth's throat. She broke cover, running toward the church. Bullets whistled past, but she didn't stop. Behind her, she heard Eli calling her name, heard more gunfire, but all that mattered was reaching those doors. She burst through to find organized evacuation already underway. Deacon Harlan, finding courage at last, was shepherding people out through the vestry while others passed buckets in a futile attempt to slow the flames.
Everyone out,
Ruth shouted.
Leave everything, just go.
The evacuation was almost complete when she heard the crying. A child, somewhere in the smoke. Ruth didn't hesitate, plunging deeper into the burning building. She found the boy, one of the Turner children, huddled behind the altar. Come on, sweetheart. She scooped him up, feeling the heat growing unbearable. The way she'd come was blocked by flames. The windows she'd have to break through. Using her body to shield the child, Ruth crashed through the stained glass, landing hard in the cemetery outside. Hands reached to take the boy, and she looked up to see Eli, his face streaked with soot and blood. You've got to stop doing that, he said, pulling her to her feet. The town is fighting back. Look! She turned to see Dust Haven transformed. The citizens who'd seemed beaten down by drought and fear had become an army. They'd turned their knowledge of the terrain against the invaders, using alleys and rooftops Crow's men didn't know existed. And at the water tower, someone had raised a flag not surrender, but defiance. A bedsheet painted with a single word, ours. The tide had turned. Crow's men, realizing they faced not victims but a community, began pulling back. Some threw down their weapons, suddenly remembering they had no stake in this fight beyond pay.
Crow!
Ruth said suddenly. Where is he? They found him at the train depot, trying to board a special car that had arrived during the fighting. Federal marshals flanked him his insurance policy, the government muscle he'd threatened. Miss Holder, the lead marshal, a graying man with tired eyes, stepped forward. I'm Marshal Briggs. Mr. Crow has asked for federal protection, claims there's been an insurrection. Insurrection, Ruth laughed, harsh and bitter. Is that what you call people defending their homes? He has papers, forged and fraudulent. Judge Weatherby appeared, looking somewhat worse for wear, but surprisingly sober. I've reviewed the documents. The ordinance is expired. The land deals are suspect, and Mr. Crow is under arrest for conspiracy and attempted murder. You have no authority, Crow began. I have all the authority I need. The judge straightened his singed robes, and a suddenly clear understanding of who's been pulling my strings. Marshal Briggs. I am formally requesting federal investigation into Mr. Crow's dealings with the Railroad Commission. Briggs looked between Crow and the judge, then at the burning town, the armed citizens, the determination on every smoke-stained face. Take him, he told his men. Crow's composure finally shattered completely. You can't. I own this territory. The railroad needs me. I'll have all your badges. The railroad, Briggs said quietly, has decided you're a liability. They'll find another way to build their hub, one that doesn't involve burning down towns. As the marshals led Crow away, Ruth felt her legs give out. Eli caught her, holding her steady as the adrenaline faded and the cost became clear. Half the town was burning. People were hurt, some dead. Her father.
He's all right,
Eli said, reading her panic.
Doc has him. He's all right.
The water, Ruth said weakly. The rights are returned to the town, effective immediately. Judge Weatherby avoided her eyes. I'll file the papers today. Should have done it years ago. The rain that had threatened for days finally came then, as if the sky had been waiting for permission. Not a gentle shower, but a deluge, dousing fires and turning the streets to mud. People stood in it, faces raised, some laughing, some crying, all baptized by the breaking of the drought. Ruth found herself pressed against Eli, his arms around her as they stood in the downpour. Around them, Dusthaven began the work of rebuilding even as the ashes cooled. Mei Lin organized the displaced. Deacon Harlan opened what remained of the church to anyone who needed shelter. Even Judge Weatherby rolled up his sleeves and helped pass buckets. We won, Ruth said, wondering at the words. We survived, Eli corrected. Winning comes later, when we rebuild better than before. She looked up at him, water streaming down both their faces. If you'll have me, if the town will have me. Seems like you might need a deputy, what with being sheriff now. I'm not. You are. Have been since you stood up in that courtroom. Badge or no badge. You're the law here now. The rain continued to fall, washing away blood and ash, feeding the thirsty earth. Tomorrow would bring challenges rebuilding, healing, learning to trust again. But tonight, in the ruins of the old Dusthaven, something new was being born. Justice hadn't come from judges or papers or federal marshals. It had come from ordinary people refusing to bow, from a community choosing courage over fear, from a sheriff's daughter who'd learned that sometimes the law had to step outside the law to serve its true purpose. The water belonged to everyone again, and in the end,
That was worth any price.
Asterisk, asterisk. Part 6. Storm night and hurried breaths. Asterisk, asterisk. The storm struck Dusthaven like a fist of ice and fury. What had begun as blessed rain turned vicious as the temperature plummeted, transforming water to sleet, then to driving snow. Ruth pressed her face against the window of Eli's stone barn, watching the world disappear behind a curtain of white. "Never seen it turn this fast," Maylin said, clutching a blanket around her shoulders. She'd been at Doc Estelle's when the storm hit, helping tend the wounded from the courthouse fight. Now she was trapped with the rest of them, nearly 24 souls, crammed into the only building strong enough to withstand nature's assault. Mountain storms. Amos wheezed from his makeshift bed near the fire. Your mother loved them, said they cleaned the world. Ruth moved to her father's side, checking his fever. Too high. Despite Doc Estelle's efforts, the doctor herself was across the barn, stitching a gash on young Jonah's arm where flying debris had caught him. Everyone accounted for. Eli emerged from checking the horses, snow dusting his shoulders like ash. His eyes found Ruth's immediately, a silent question in them. The Turners made it to the church. Widow O'Brien's with her sister. Ruth tried to keep the worry from her voice. But that's 20 families unaccounted for, scattered across the valley. A tremendous crack split the air, a tree giving way under the weight of ice. The barn shuddered but held. In the corner, the younger children huddled closer to their mothers.
Built this barn to last,
Eli said, loud enough for everyone to hear.
Stone walls 3 feet thick. We're safe here.
But Ruth caught his glance toward the door, saw his hand check the rifle propped nearby. They both knew the storm wasn't the only danger. Crow's men, those who'd escaped the federal marshals, were still out there. Pike especially wouldn't give up easy. "Miss Ruth," little Sarah Turner tugged at her sleeve. "Are the bad men coming?" Ruth knelt to the child's level. "If they do, we'll be ready. But right now, the storm's keeping everyone where they are." A sound cut through the wind's howl, not natural, not the storm. Ruth's hand found her pistol as Eli moved toward the door. Through the small window, shadows moved in the white. "Company," Eli said quietly. 5, maybe 6 riders." The adults scrambled to defensive positions they'd prepared earlier. Mei Lin proved surprisingly efficient with a rifle, taking position at the loft window. Doc Estelle gathered the children into the fortified corner, her medical bag doubling as armor. Ruth Holder," Pike's voice carried through the storm.
"We know you're in there. Got a proposition."
"Only proposition I want to hear involves you riding away," Ruth called back. Harsh laughter. "Not likely, see. Federal marshals got the boss, but they didn't get his money. Hidden away safe. We're thinking maybe we take you and the old man. Trade for our passage out of the territory. Try it." Eli's voice was stone. "See how far you get." "That you, Mercer should have known you'd be sniffing around the sheriff's daughter." "Well, here's the thing. We got the place surrounded. You can't get out, but fire can get in. Wouldn't take much. Dry wood and oil. Course, we'd rather do this civilized-like." Ruth felt the fear ripple through the barn. Fire, always fire with these men, but Eli squeezed her shoulder. "Bluffing," he murmured. "Can't start a fire in this storm. Snow's too wet, wind's too strong." As if to prove his point, they heard cursing outside, the scratch of matches failing to catch. But that didn't mean Pike would give up.
10 minutes,
Pike shouted.
Then we come in.
The barn erupted in whispered conferences. Some wanted to negotiate, others to fight. Amos tried to rise, insisting they take him and leave the others, but collapsed in a coughing fit that left blood on his lips. "Nobody's trading anybody," Ruth said firmly. "We've got walls, weapons, and the storm on our side. They're exposed out there, freezing. Time favors us." "Does it?" Maylin pointed to the corner where melted snow was beginning to seep through. "This storm gets worse. We could be buried. No food for days. Wounded need care." Children need warmth. Ruth looked around the barn at the frightened faces, the wounded, her dying father. The weight of leadership pressed down like the snow on the roof. Whatever choice she made, people would pay for it. "I'll go." Everyone turned to stare at Jonah, standing despite his injured arm. "Don't be stupid, boy," Eli said, but Jonah shook his head. "Not stupid, strategic. I slip out the back, circle around in the storm. They can't see 10 feet. I make it to town, ring the church bell. Everyone'll come running." "It's suicide," Ruth said. "You can't navigate in this." "Been working this ranch 2 years. Know every rock and tree between here and town. I can do it." Ruth saw the determination in his eyes, the need to prove himself, and tactically, he wasn't wrong if he could raise the alarm. "I'll cover you," she decided. "Create a distraction out front." "No." Eli's tone brooked no argument. "If anyone's playing decoy, it's me." "This isn't about protection," Ruth snapped. "It's about tactics. Pike wants me, not you. I can hold his attention longer." "Exactly why." "Both of you stop." Amos's voice, though weak, still carried authority. "Ruth's right, but she doesn't go alone." He looked at Mei Lin, and something passed between them, understanding born of necessity. "I know these men," Mei Lin said quietly. "How they think, what distracts them. Miss Ruth and I, we give them a show. Man sees 2 women, he sees weakness, sees what he expects, not what is." Ruth understood immediately. "We go out together, negotiate, buy Jonah time." "I'm coming with you," Eli stated. "No." Ruth turned to him, seeing the conflict in his eyes. "Someone has to coordinate the defense if things go bad. That's you. Please, Eli. Trust me." For a moment, they stood frozen, the weight of unspoken words between them. Then Eli nodded once, sharp. "Pike," Ruth called. "We're coming out to talk, just me and one other." "Smart girl. But any tricks and we start shooting." Ruth checked the derringer in her boot, her Colt on her hip. Mei Lin produced a wicked-looking knife from somewhere in her skirts, winking at Ruth's surprise. "Sewing scissors not only sharp things I keep handy." They pushed open the barn door, wind and snow hitting like a physical blow. Ruth could barely make out Pike and his men, dark shapes in the white. Behind her, she sensed Jonah slipping out the back, swallowed immediately by the storm. "Close enough," Pike called when they were 10 feet away. "So, the sheriff's daughter and the China doll. This'll be easier than I thought." "Nothing about this will be easy," Ruth said, pitching her voice to Carrie. "Federal marshals are coming? You kill us. You hang for certain." "Marshals ain't coming in this storm. We got time." Pike's grin was visible even through the snow. "Now, here's what's going to happen." Mei Lin stumbled, crying out. As Pike's attention shifted, she fell against him, hands fluttering helplessly. Ruth saw the subtle movement, Mei Lin's knife finding the cinch on Pike's saddle. "Get off me!" Pike shoved her away, but the damage was done. Ruth played her part, helping Mei Lin up, buying precious seconds. How far had Jonah gotten? Not far enough. "Enough games," one of Pike's men growled. "Take them and—" The church bell rang, faint through the storm, but unmistakable. One toll, then another, the rhythm that meant emergency. All hands needed. Jonah had made it. Pike's face twisted. "Double-cross shoot them." But as he went for his gun, his saddle weakened, cinch cut through, slipped sideways. He tumbled into the snow, cursing. The momentary confusion was all Ruth needed. Her Colt cleared leather, finding targets. Mei Lin rolled behind a water trough with surprising agility. The barn door burst open, Eli and others providing covering fire. The battle in the blizzard was chaos, muzzle flashes in white, shouts lost in wind. Ruth couldn't see more than shapes, but fired at movement. Trusting instinct. A shadow loomed Sutter Lane, Pike's scarred lieutenant. His rifle swung toward her. The derringer in her boot, Margaret's gun, found her hand without thought. The small pistol barked, and Sutter spun away into the storm. "Fall back to the barn," Eli's voice. Close now. His hand found her arm, pulling her towards safety. But Pike had found his feet, face twisted with rage, his gun centered on Ruth. Time slowed. Mei Lin rose from the snow like an avenging spirit, her knife leaving her hand in a perfect arc. Pike screamed, clutching his shoulder, his shot going wild. They tumbled through the barn door together, Ruth, Eli, Mei Lin. Others slammed it shut, bracing it with timber. Anyone hit Doc Estelle was already moving, checking for wounds. "I'm fine," Ruth gasped, though adrenaline made her hands shake. She looked at Mei Lin with new respect. "Where did you learn to throw like that?" "Some stories better left buried." Mei Lin repeated her earlier words, but smiled. "Though sometimes, past skills prove useful." Outside, they could hear Pike's men retreating, their shouts growing fainter. The church bell continued to ring, and now came answering sounds: gunshots, voices. The town was coming. "Jonah did it," someone breathed. Through the storm, Ruth could see lights approaching, torches and lanterns defying the wind. Half of Dusthaven, armed and ready, responding to a boy's courage and a bell's call. The siege broke. Pike's remaining men fled into the blizzard rather than face the aroused town. They'd be lucky to survive the night, but that was nature's justice now. Later, much later, after the wounded were tended and the children calmed, after Pike was found frozen in a drift still clutching his shoulder, after the storm began to exhaust itself, Ruth found herself in the barn's small office with Eli. They were alone for the first time since the fight, checking ammunition stores by lamplight. The silence between them was charged with everything unsaid. "You took too many risks," Eli said finally, not looking at her. "So did you. I'm not the one Pike wanted." "No, you're just the one who charged out into gunfire to pull me back." Ruth set down the bullets she'd been counting. "We're alive. Eli, we won." "This time." He turned to face her, and the raw emotion in his eyes made her breath catch. "Ruth, when Pike had that gun on you, He stopped, jaw working. "I know," she said softly. "When you went for Sutter, when I thought he might—" Now she was the one who couldn't finish. They moved at the same moment, meeting in the middle of the small space. Eli's hands framed her face, thumbs gentle on her cheekbones. "I can't lose someone else," he said roughly. "Can't watch another person Ruth silenced him with her lips on his. The kiss was desperate, affirmation of life in the face of death. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, she kept her hands fisted in his shirt. "I'm not Margaret," she said firmly. "I'm not going anywhere. We're both too stubborn to die easy. Ruth," her name was prayer and promise, "I need you to know." The door burst open. Jonah stood there, face flushed with cold and triumph. "Sorry I didn't, that is—" The boy turned red as sunset. "What is it? Jonah?" Ruth asked, stepping back from Eli with as much dignity as she could muster. "Your pa's asking for you. Both of you. Says it's important." They found Amos propped up, looking somehow both worse and more at peace than before. He gestured them close, voice barely a whisper. "The town came together," he said. "Proved what I always believed folks are good when given the chance. Ruth, you showed them how, and Eli." He gripped the younger man's hand. "Take care of her, not because she needs it, but because that's what partners do." "Papa!" Ruth's eyes burned with unshed tears. "I'm proud of you, girl. Your mother would be too. Remember, badge doesn't make the law. Heart does. You've got the heart for it." Through the rest of the storm, Ruth sat by her father's side, Eli's solid presence behind her, Mei Lin bringing tea, Doc Estelle monitoring his breathing, the barn full of people they'd protected, who'd come to protect them in turn. The storm would pass, morning would come. There would be rebuilding, healing, justice still to pursue, but tonight, in a barn become fortress, become sanctuary. Ruth Holder understood what it meant to stand for something larger than yourself. And in the midst of loss and victory, fear and courage, she'd found something unexpected, not just duty or justice, but love. The kind that stands steady through storms, that fights beside you rather than for you. That makes the badge worth wearing and the town worth saving. Take what you want. She'd gasped in that moment of choice and courage, when death knocked and life demanded answer, and what she wanted, she now knew. Was this man, this town, this chance to build something better from the ashes? The storm howled on, but inside the stone walls, the lamp burned steady, like hope, like love, like the future they'd fight to see dawn. Asterisk, asterisk, Part 7. Fire at the station, asterisk, asterisk. The morning after the storm dawned crystal and merciless, revealing Dust Haven transformed by ice and violence. Ruth stood on the platform of the train station, her breath misting in the frigid air as she surveyed the crowd gathering below. Word had spread like wildfire Crow was being transferred to the federal courthouse in Cheyenne, and half the town had come to witness his departure. "They're late," Eli observed, checking his pocket watch. The scheduled 9:15 had come and gone, and the track stretched empty toward the horizon. Maybe the storm damaged the rails, Doc Estelle suggested, though her tone suggested she suspected otherwise. She'd insisted on coming despite the wounded still needing care. That man has more lives than a cat. Ruth touched the badge now officially pinned to her coat Judge Weatherby had sworn her in as temporary sheriff that morning. Her father too weak to attend the brief ceremony. The weight of it felt different than she'd expected. Heavier, more permanent. Ruth Mei Lin pushed through the crowd, face tight with urgency. Deacon Harlan's missing. His bed wasn't slept in. And, she lowered her voice, the church safe is open. Empty. Ice that had nothing to do with the weather settled in Ruth's stomach. The safe had held the evidence against Crow signed testimonies, financial records, the original documents that proved his guilt. "He wouldn't," Ruth said, but even as the words left her mouth, she remembered the deacon's trembling hands, his fear of Crow that ran bone deep. "Dollar says he would." A familiar voice drawled. Sutter Lane stepped from behind a stack of crates, arm in a sling from Mei Lin's knife work, but very much alive. Amazing what men do when their debts come due. Eli's hand went to his gun, but Sutter raised his good hand peacefully. "Not here for a fight. Mercer, got a message from the boss." "Crow's in federal custody," Ruth said coldly. "Is he?" Sutter smiled, and warning bells clanged in Ruth's mind. "See, that's the thing about money. It opens doors, even federal ones." The distant whistle of an approaching train cut through the morning air, but it was coming from the wrong direction from the east, when the prison transfer should have been from the north. "What did you do?" Ruth demanded. "Me, nothing. But Mr. Crow, he's got friends. Important friends. Friends who think this whole mess has gotten out of hand." Sutter nodded toward the approaching train. Special charter, private car, federal warrant ordering his release pending investigation of irregularities in his arrest. "No," Ruth breathed, but she could see the truth in Sutter's satisfied smirk. The train pulled in with a squeal of brakes and cloud of steam. Sure enough, it was no ordinary locomotive, but a luxurious private car bearing railroad company insignia. The door opened, and Crow himself stepped out, free as a bird and dressed in a fresh suit. "Miss Holder," he tipped his hat mockingly. "Sheriff Holder, I should say. Congratulations on the promotion. Shame it'll be so short-lived. Behind him emerged men in federal badges, their faces carefully blank. One stepped forward with official papers. Sheriff Holder, I'm Marshal Garrett. We've been ordered to investigate claims of illegal seizure of property in violation of Mr. Crow's civil rights.
Civil rights,
Ruth's voice rose.
He burned half the town.
Alleged. Crow corrected smoothly. And sadly, all the evidence seems to have disappeared. He made a show of checking his pocket watch. Poor Deacon Harlan. Gambling debts are such a terrible burden. I heard he took the eastbound stage at dawn, with quite a heavy trunk. The crowd's mood shifted. Ugly murmurs rippling through the gathered townspeople. They'd come to see justice done, and instead witnessed its perversion. Now, Crow continued, I believe we have business to discuss. The water rights belong to the town. Ruth interrupted. Judge Weatherby's ruling stands. Does it? Crow produced a sheaf of papers. Federal court says otherwise. Seems local judges exceeded their authority. The territorial governor agrees. In fact, his smile widened. The governor has appointed a new sheriff, someone more suitable for maintaining order. Sutter Lane straightened, and Ruth noticed the badge now pinned to his coat. You can't be serious, Eli growled. Deadly serious. Crow replied. Sheriff Lane's first duty will be to restore the rightful water allocations. Anyone interfering will be arrested for sedition. Over my dead body, someone in the crowd shouted, and Ruth recognized Tom Morrison, whose cattle had died of thirst. That can be arranged, Sutter said casually, and his hand moved toward his gun. Stop! Ruth stepped forward, mind racing. She caught Eli's eye, saw him reading her intention. Mei Lin, too, was shifting position subtly. You want to discuss terms, fine, but not here. Too public. Too many witnesses. Crow's eyes narrowed, but greed won over caution. The station office, then you, me, and our respective advisors. They filed into the small office. Ruth, Eli, and Mei Lin facing Crow, Sutter, and Marshal Garrett. Through the window, Ruth could see the crowd milling, uncertain but unwilling to disperse. Here's what's going to happen. Crow began, but Ruth cut him off. No, here's what you're going to hear. She pulled out a leather journal from her coat. This is my father's personal record. Names, dates, amounts. Every bribe you paid, every threat you made, every death you caused. Without corroborating evidence. Like this, Mei Lin produced a packet of letters from her sleeve. Correspondence between you and railroad executives. Planning the land grab before the drought. I believe the term used was clear the undesirable elements. Crow's face darkened. How did you... Deacon Harlan, Mei Lin said simply. He took your gold. Yes, but left these with me first. Said confession good for the soul. Even if true. Marshal Garrett intervened, clearly uncomfortable. These are copies. Without originals. You mean these originals? The voice came from the door. Doc Estelle entered, medical bag in hand. But Ruth knew what it really contained. They'd made the switch that morning, gambling on Crow's arrogance.
You're all under arrest,
Sutter snarled, reaching for his gun. Several things happened at once. Eli flipped the desk, sending papers flying and providing cover. Mei Lin's thrown scissors embedded in Sutter's gun hand. Ruth dove for Marshal Garrett, gambling that a federal lawman would hesitate to shoot a woman. She was right. Garrett froze, and she relieved him of his sidearm in one smooth motion. Nobody move, she commanded, covering the room. Through the window, she could see the crowd pressing closer, alerted by the commotion. Jonah's face appeared at the glass, eyes wide. You can't hold us, Crow said, but sweat beaded on his forehead. My men are currently being rounded up by federal marshals. a new voice announced. The door opened to reveal Marshal Briggs, the older lawman who'd arrested Crow before. Real federal marshals. Garrett here's going to have some explaining to do about that forged warrant. You set us up, Crow breathed. You set yourself up, Ruth replied. We just provided the rope. But Crow wasn't finished, even cornered. He remained dangerous. You think you've won, the railroad still needs this land. If not through me, then through someone else. You can't stop progress. Progress, Ruth laughed bitterly. Is that what you call theft and murder? I call it civilization. This backward town, these stubborn fools scratching at dirt, you're the past. I'm the future. Then the future can burn. The voice was Amos Holder's. He stood in the doorway, supported by Jonah but holding a lit lantern in his shaking hand. Behind him, Ruth could see more lanterns. Torches, the entire town armed with fire. Papa, no! Ruth started, but her father's eyes were clear, determined. 40 years I've worn a badge, Amos said, voice carrying despite its weakness. 40 years of law and order, but sometimes, he looked at Crow, sometimes justice and law aren't the same thing. He threw the lantern, not at anyone, at the stack of papers on the floor. Crow's deeds, contracts, legal weapons, they caught instantly, flames racing across the scattered documents. No! Crow lunged for them, but Eli blocked him. The fire spread to the curtains, the wooden walls. The station office became an inferno in moments. Everyone out, Ruth commanded, but the crowd was already backing away. They evacuated in good order, even Crow and his men, now under proper arrest. They stood on the platform, watching the station burn. The private railroad car tried to pull away, but townspeople had uncoupled it from the engine. It sat stranded as flames reached toward it. My father burned evidence, Ruth said quietly to Marshal Briggs. You'll have to arrest him. Briggs looked at the dying man leaning on his daughter, at the town standing unified behind them, at the burning symbol of corruption. I didn't see anything, he said finally. Tragic accident. Storm damage weakened the structure. These things happen. The fire spread to the private car, and with it went Crow's remaining legal claims. His screams of rage were drowned out by the crowd's cheers. You've destroyed everything, Crow struggled against his captors. The railroad will. The railroad will build around us, a new voice said. Everyone turned to see the Eastern stranger from weeks ago, stepping down from the regular morning train that had finally arrived. Mr. Crow, you've become a liability. The board has decided to pursue other routes. You can't, we had a deal. Had, the man emphasized. Past tense, Sheriff Holder. The railroad would like to negotiate new terms, fair terms, with the town council's full involvement. Ruth felt the shift, the moment when power changed hands not through force, but through collective will. We'll listen, but water rights remain with the town, non-negotiable. Understood, as Crow was led away, still screaming about lawyers and revenge. Ruth noticed Sutter Lane had slipped his bonds in the confusion. He stood at the platform's edge, blood dripping from his wounded hand. This isn't over, he told her. The boss has friends. You'll never be safe. Neither will you, Eli said, stepping beside Ruth. Every bounty hunter in 3 territories will be looking for you. Sutter's scarred face twisted, but he recognized the truth. With a final curse, he vanished into the alleys of Dust Haven, running for his life. Let him go, Ruth decided. He's finished here. The station continued to burn, taking with it the old order. But already, Ruth could see the new beginning townspeople organizing bucket brigades not to save the corrupt structure, but to protect the surrounding buildings, working together, unified by shared purpose. Sheriff Holder, someone called. Ruth turned, expecting to see her father, but it was her they addressed. The title felt right now. earned in fire and storm. What are your orders? She looked at Eli, who nodded encouragement, at Mei Lin, smiling with quiet pride, at her father, who raised a trembling hand in salute. Clear the platform, she commanded. Set up a perimeter. Nobody else profits from this fire. She turned to the railroad representative. You want to negotiate? Fine. Town hall. 1 hour. Bring your best offer. As the crowd dispersed to their tasks, Ruth found herself momentarily alone with Eli. The fire crackled behind them, but its destructive power was contained, controlled. You did it, he said simply. We did it. She touched the badge on her coat. This is just the beginning. Rebuilding, negotiating, keeping the peace. The real work starts now. Good thing you won't be doing it alone. His hand found hers, and Ruth didn't pull away. Couldn't, even if she'd wanted to. Her father approached, each step an effort. Proud of you, girl. Your mother would be too. The town's in good hands. Papa. I'll see the doctor now, he interrupted gently. Think I've stayed vertical about as long as I can. But Ruth, remember, badge is just metal. What matters is the heart wearing it. As they helped him toward Doc Estelle's office, Ruth took one last look at the burning station. From its ashes would rise something new, not perfect, perhaps, but honest. Built on community rather than corruption. Law serving justice rather than power. The morning sun climbed higher, burning away the last of the storm clouds. And in Dust Haven, Sheriff Ruth Holder began the long work of building a future worth fighting for. The station fire would burn itself out by noon, leaving only twisted metal and ash. But the fire lit in the hearts of the townspeople that would burn for generations. A reminder that sometimes, to preserve justice, you had to be willing to let the old world burn. And from those ashes, like the desert after rain, new life would grow. Asterisk, asterisk, Part 8. Open wells and unextinguished light. Asterisk, asterisk. 6 weeks had passed since the station burned, and spring touched Dust Haven with tentative fingers. Ruth stood at the edge of the reopened north well, watching water flow clear and free into irrigation channels that farmers had spent the last month digging. The sight of it, life-giving water moving unimpeded, still made her throat tight with emotion. Sheriff Holder, young Sarah Turner ran up, braids flying. Mama says to tell you the corn sprouting first green in 2 years. Ruth smiled, adjusting the badge that had become as natural as breathing. Tell your mama that's the best news I've heard all week. The child scampered off, and Ruth turned to survey the transformed town, where the burned station had stood. A new community center was rising, built with lumber donated by the railroad as part of their negotiated agreement. The company would get their shipping hub, but 3 towns over, where the land was less fertile and the sellers willing. Lost in thought again, Eli's voice came from behind her, warm with the quiet humor that had become more common these past weeks. Planning, she corrected, turning to face him. The spring festival's in 2 days, and Mei Lin insists everything must be perfect. Mei Lin insists on perfection. Shocking. He moved closer, and Ruth didn't step away. Couldn't, really. Not when he looked at her like she'd hung the moon. How's your father? The question dimmed her smile slightly. Stubborn as ever. Doc Estelle says he's got maybe a month, but he insists on working. Filed 17 years' worth of backed-up paperwork yesterday. Sounds like him. Eli's hand found hers, a gesture that had become commonplace, but never lost its power to steady her. And like his daughter, they walked together toward the church, where sounds of construction echoed. Deacon Harlan had returned after a week, shamefaced and repentant, the money untouched in his trunk. The town had voted narrowly to forgive him, though he'd stepped down from his position. Now he worked alongside others, rebuilding what fear had nearly destroyed. Miss Ruth Mr. Eli. Jonah Bell waved from the church roof, where he was helping nail shingles. In the weeks since the storm, he'd grown 2 inches and found a confidence that transformed him from boy to young man.
Doc says to tell you she needs you at the jail.
The jail had become a makeshift hospital and meeting hall while the town rebuilt. Ruth quickened her pace, Eli matching her stride. They found Doc Estelle tending to a stranger, a woman, Mexican by her features, with a baby in her arms and fear in her eyes.
"Sheriff," the woman said in accented English, "they say you help people. All people."
"What's your name?" Ruth asked gently, noting the dust of hard travel on the woman's clothes.
"Rosa Morales, my husband. He worked the railroad camps. But the boss there,
She clutched the baby tighter.
he say we owe money for food, for shelter."
"More than we can pay." "Say he own us now." Ruth's jaw tightened. She'd heard whispers of such practices in the railroad camps' company stores. Inflated prices. Debt slavery by another name. Which camp?
30 miles west, Rock Creek, the boss. His name is Sutter Lane."
Eli cursed softly. So that's where the scarred gunman had fled, still finding ways to exploit the desperate.
"He's not untouchable,"
Ruth said firmly. "Mrs. Morales, you're under the protection of Dusthaven now. Doc, can they stay with you?" Already making room. Estelle replied,
"But Ruth,
"If Sutter's running that camp, then it's time someone reminded him that the law reaches everywhere." Ruth looked at Eli. "Feel like a ride?" "Always." His grin was sharp. "Though maybe we should bring backup. Already ahead of you?" May Lynn appeared in the doorway, her riding clothes a stark contrast to her usual silk. "Tom Morrison and 5 others are saddling up. Word spreads fast when there's real law to be upheld." An hour later, Ruth led a delegation of 8 riders west, badges glinting in the spring sun. They weren't all official deputies, the town couldn't afford that. But they wore the authority of community consent, which in frontier terms meant more than paper credentials. The Rock Creek camp sprawled in a valley, tents and shacks housing the workers who laid track through impossible terrain. Ruth could see the company store, prices chalked on a board that made her blood boil flour at 5 times the town rate, water charged by the cup. Sutter Lane emerged from the store as they approached, his scarred face twisting into a mockery of welcome. "Sheriff Holder, bit outside your jurisdiction. Aren't you?"
"Justice doesn't have borders,"
Ruth replied, dismounting smooth and easy.
"Got a complaint about illegal debt practices."
"No law against charging what the market will bear."
"There is when you create the market through force."
She gestured to the armed men lounging around the store.
"These workers free to leave."
"Free as birds, long as they settle their accounts. At prices you set, for goods they can't get elsewhere." Ruth stepped closer, aware of Eli and the others fanning out behind her. "That's not business. Sutter, that's bondage."
"Prove it."
Ruth smiled.
"Gladly, Mr. Morrison."
Tom Morrison stepped forward with a ledger. "Been talking to the territorial governor. Seems he's mighty interested in how the railroad treats its workers, especially after I showed him these supply invoices, same goods, charged to the railroad at a quarter what you're charging these folks." Sutter's hand twitched toward his gun, but froze as 8 rifles swung his direction. "Now," Ruth continued conversationally, "you've got 2 choices. Pack up and ride out permanently, or explain to a federal judge why you're stealing from both the railroad and its workers." "You can't run me off, I've got rights." "So do they." Ruth nodded toward the workers who'd gathered, hope dawning on weathered faces. "Every debt in that store gets recalculated at fair market price. Anyone who wants to leave, leaves, no questions, no threats." For a moment, violence trembled in the air. Then one of Sutter's men lowered his rifle. "Not worth dying for," he muttered. The defection started a cascade. Within minutes, Sutter stood alone, his empire of exploitation crumbling. "This isn't over," he snarled at Ruth.
"Yes," she said simply. "It is."
By sunset, they were back in Dust Haven with 30 new residence workers and families who'd chosen to try their luck in a town with fair law. Mei Lin had already organized temporary housing, her network of church women providing food and comfort. Ruth found her father in his office, laboriously writing in his journal. He looked up as she entered, and she was struck by how translucent he'd become, as if he was already halfway to another place.
"Heard you cleaned out Rock Creek," he said, pride evident despite his weakness. "Just doing the job."
She sat beside him, noting the legal documents spread across his desk.
"What's all this?"
"Making things official." He pushed a paper toward her. "Territorial approval for a new position, county sheriff, with jurisdiction over the whole valley. Governor signed it this morning."
"Papa?"
"It's yours. Ruth, earned fair and square." He gripped her hand, his touch paper-light but still warm. "But there's conditions. Need a deputy you can trust." "I know who I want." Amos smiled. "Figured you might. Eli's a good man, best kind one who knows his own darkness and chooses light anyway." They sat in companionable silence, watching the sun paint the mountains gold. Through the window, Ruth could see the town coming alive, families heading home from the reopened wells, children playing in dust that no longer spoke of drought but of life continuing. "I won't be here for the festival," Amos said quietly.
"Papa, don't."
"Let me say this." His voice carried the authority of a man setting his affairs in order. "I've made my peace. Your mother's waiting, and I'm tired. Ruth, but I need to know the town's in good hands."
"It is. We've got water flowing free, fair laws, and people willing to stand for each other."
Ruth's voice broke slightly. "You did that. You held the line until we could build something better." "We all did it." He touched the badge on her vest. "Remember that. Law's not about one person being strong. It's about giving everyone the strength to stand together." The spring festival dawned bright and clear. The whole valley had come to celebrate water, survival, community. Mei Lin had outdone herself, transforming the town square into a wonderland of colored ribbons and wildflowers that had returned with the rain. Ruth stood on the church steps, watching couples dance to fiddle music. Her father had been right, he hadn't made it to see this day, passing quietly 3 nights before with Ruth and Eli beside him. But his legacy lived in every laughing child, every family no longer fearing tomorrow. "Dance with me." Eli appeared at her elbow, cleaned up and handsome in his Sunday best.
"Sheriffs don't dance,"
she protested, but she was already taking his hand. "This one does." He led her into the square, and the crowd parted to make room. Other couples joined them, and soon the whole town was moving to the music, a living testament to endurance. As they turned, Ruth caught sight of Rosa Morales dancing with her husband, baby safe in Mei Lin's arms. Tom Morrison whirled past with his wife, their children chasing fireflies at the square's edge. Even Deacon Harlan was there, tentatively rejoining the community he'd nearly betrayed. "What are you thinking?" Eli asked, pulling her closer as the music slowed.
"That maybe happy endings aren't endings at all,"
Ruth replied. "Just places to catch our breath before the next chapter." Speaking of next chapters, he reached into his pocket, producing a simple gold ring. "Ruth Holder, will you?"
"Yes."
She didn't let him finish, kissing him there in the middle of the square while the town cheered, and somewhere in the distance, a train whistle announced progress that no longer threatened but promised. Later, as the festival wound down, Ruth stood at the well that had started it all. The water flowed steady and clear, no longer owned, but shared. She touched her father's badge, now truly hers, and made a silent promise. Justice wasn't a destination, but a journey. Law wasn't about power, but protection. and love was the light that made it all worthwhile. Mei Lin appeared beside her, as she always seemed to at important moments. Your father would be proud.
I hope so. I know so.
She produced a letter from her sleeve.
This came on the evening train, from the governor.
Ruth opened it, scanning quickly. Her eyebrows rose.
They want me to train other sheriffs, create a new model for frontier law enforcement.
Will you? Ruth looked out at her town, scarred but healing, tested but strong. We'll see. First, I've got a wedding to plan and a town to protect.
And a future to build,
Mei Lin added softly. The oil lamp in front of the sheriff's office had been relit with a new wick, its yellow glow small but steady against the gathering dark. Ruth had insisted on the same lamp, despite offers of newer models. Some things were worth preserving. As the stars emerged overhead, Ruth Holder Sheriff, bride-to-be, keeper of the peace, walked through her town. Children called out greetings, adults nodded respect, and in every face she saw the truth her father had taught her. Justice wasn't a miracle. It was a habit of courage practiced by ordinary people. The drought had broken, the corruption had burned, and in Dust Haven, at the edge of tomorrow, hope ran as free as water from an open well. The end.
Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to know where in the world you're enjoying these Wild West tales. Please share in the comments below where you're listening from so we can connect and share our thoughts together.
If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to Wild West Night channel. Give this video a like, and don't forget to hit that hype button to help more people discover these frontier stories. Your support means everything and helps keep the spirit of the Old West alive.